Reflecting on my past, I can distinctly trace the divide between the chapters of my life to a specific moment at 15. During a quiet evening in our modest living room, my parents shared that they were divorcing. There was no turmoil or raised voices, just three people who had drifted apart, each desiring different paths in life. Surprisingly, I accepted the news with a calm that might have stemmed from their mature approach, or perhaps I had anticipated the change, observing signs like the decrease in family dinners and their coexistence more as roommates than spouses. My father relocated to a pleasant apartment across town, and our weekends together remained unchanged, filled with pizza and cheesy sci-fi films. However, a year post-divorce, my mother introduced a significant change. She was elated one morning, telling me over breakfast about meeting someone named Gabriel, who had a 9-year-old daughter. The idea of gaining a sister seemed nice, but the reality unfolded differently. Gabriel and his daughter Amara moved in soon after he and my mother married. Amara always dressed impeccably and sweetly in the presence of adults, but revealed a different side in their absence. Subtle sabotages began, my favorite sweater ruined by red socks in the wash, coffee stains mysteriously appearing on my homework. Gabriel's subtle digs didn't help, critiquing my clothing choices and insinuating I should focus more on my studies. My attempts to discuss these issues with my mother were dismissed. She believed Gabriel was merely being protective. The tipping point came with the research project incident. I had invested weeks gathering data and conducting interviews for it. Coming home early one day, I caught Amara in my room, her hands stained green from the markers she'd used to deface my project. Enraged, I dragged her to confront our parents. As I pointed out the evidence, Gabriel vehemently defended his daughter and scolded me, calling me a fool. I turned to my mother for support, but she offered none, only disappointment directed at me. That night, unable to sleep and tormented by the day's events, I resolved to leave by dawn. I was hastily packing my belongings when I called my dad, and within minutes, he was ready to pick me up. As I loaded my bags into his truck, my mother watched from the doorway, pleading with me not to overreact. Facing her one last time, I expressed my hurt over her indifference and the destruction of my work. Her silence spoke volumes, confirming my decision as I left to start a new chapter with my father. After I shared the incident with my dad, I could see his demeanor change instantly. When I told him about Gabriel's disrespectful words, he was furious and headed straight to Gabriel's office to confront him. I waited in the truck, watching from a distance as my dad stormed into the building. Through the office window, I saw them, my dad pointing forcefully and Gabriel rising to meet his accusations, both red-faced and agitated. Security had to intervene before the situation escalated further. Life at my dad's place was a breath of fresh air. It felt like coming up for air after being submerged. The constant tension and paranoia I had lived with at my mom's house were gone. My dad supported me wholeheartedly, helping me redo my ruined research project with late-night sessions accompanied by coffee and snacks. A few days later, my mom sent me a message accusing me of turning my father against Gabriel and tearing our family apart. I didn't respond. What family was she referring to? One where I was verbally abused and my belongings destroyed? I chose to focus on finishing my senior year strong. At graduation, my dad and grandma were there in the front row, cheering loudly. My mom attended too, with Gabriel and Amara, but I hardly acknowledged them. Afterward, my grandma hugged me tightly, sharing that she and my dad had been saving for my college fund, which would cover my tuition at a local college. Moving into the dorms that fall marked a new chapter. A few months into my sophomore year, my mom reached out via social media, expressing remorse and a desire to talk. We met at a cafe near campus, and it was awkward at first, with both of us stirring our coffee too long and avoiding eye contact. Mom mentioned Amara looking at colleges and Gabriel's new car, but I steered the conversation towards safer topics like my classes and potential graduate school plans. Our relationship evolved into monthly coffee meetings where we discussed neutral topics like the weather and my studies. Though she occasionally tried to bring up Gabriel and Amara, I would gently redirect our conversations. After graduation, I secured a job at Marshall & Associates as a junior project manager. My dad was thrilled and offered me a place in his apartment to save money, but I decided it was time to stand on my own. I found a modest apartment close to work. The first night there, eating takeout on a second-hand couch, I felt a profound sense of adulthood. I was diligent with my finances, saving a significant portion of my paycheck for a future house fund and opting for homemade lunches over expensive outings with colleagues. When a challenging client came up at work, everyone hesitated, but I stepped up. 5 months later, I had successfully managed the project ahead of schedule, earning a commendation and a bonus from my impressed boss. As the quarterly bonuses began to stack up, each one substantial, I diligently directed every dime into my savings. My colleagues often joked about my frugality, questioning why I skipped the after-work gatherings and weekend getaways. "You're wasting your youth," my mom echoed during one of our routine coffee catch-ups, about 3 years into my disciplined savings plan. "You should enjoy life a bit more." "I am enjoying life," I responded firmly. "I'm building my future." She stirred her coffee distractedly, shifting the topic to Amara, who was thriving in college and had just joined a sorority. I steered the conversation back to safer grounds, mentioning the recent pleasant weather. Family events like Thanksgiving at Aunt Margot's or Christmas at Uncle Samuel's were the few occasions where avoiding Gabriel and Amara became challenging. Amara, now more poised and attending college, still shot me those smug looks. Her bratty demeanor was polished but palpable. Gabriel, always ready with a condescending remark, would make snide comments about my job, loudly noting my entry-level position despite knowing full well about my promotions. Last Thanksgiving, as I helped Aunt Margot in the kitchen, my mom cornered me by the refrigerator. "Bella, don't you think this has gone on long enough?" she sighed. "Amara's grown up. Gabriel's mellowed. Can't we just be a family?" I shut the fridge with more force than necessary. "We're not a family, Mom. We're just connected by your marriage. That's it." Her expression shifted to one of exasperation. "You're being childish," she accused. I met her gaze directly. People grow. People change. I've grown enough to know I don't need toxic people in my life, even if they're technically family.
She opened her mouth to counter, then simply shook her head and walked away, always opting to avoid confrontation. Each dismissive comment from Gabriel and each arrogant glance from Amara only affirmed my decision to maintain distance. On my 30th birthday, the years of scrimping paid off as I signed the papers for my new house. Putting down 70% up front, the mortgage was manageable, a minor detail in my planned future. "Congratulations, Miss Parker," the realtor beamed, handing me the keys to what was now my home. I stood in the empty living room, soaking in the reality of my achievement: 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, granite kitchen counters, and a backyard begging for a garden. It was all undeniably mine. Planning a housewarming, I invited close friends and family, though Dad and Grandma, now enjoying retirement in Los Angeles, couldn't attend. When I called Mom, I specified I'd love for you to come, just you. She hesitated. "Bella, that's not fair to Gabriel and Amara." "It's my house, my rules," I insisted. Reluctantly, she agreed. Yet on the day, I opened my door to find not just my mother, but also Gabriel and Amara in tow. "Surprise," Mom offered weakly at my evident dismay. I held back my frustration and welcomed them in. Gabriel surveyed my home, his lips curling subtly as he remarked on the crown molding in hardwood floors, his approval faint and begrudging. Amara, ever the fashionista, commented dismissively on the kitchen size. As I led my colleague Micah to show the patio, I felt a mix of pride and irritation. My space, my sanctuary, was open for this day, but my boundaries remained as firm as the walls of my new home. As I mingled with my guests, a loud voice from the living room caught my attention. It was Amara, boasting to her parents. "I've been looking at houses too," she announced. "I'm going to get one much bigger than this, with a pool." I couldn't resist responding, so I stepped back into the living room. "Really? That's interesting. What job are you planning to buy it with?" Her face turned red as she struggled for an answer. I have prospects, she managed to mumble. Prospects aren't paychecks, I countered, recalling that she was still heavily reliant on her father's credit card. At this, Gabriel's face flushed a deep purple, and he began, "How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" I interrupted, standing my ground firmly. "You show up uninvited, then insult my home." My mother, sensing the tension escalating quickly, grabbed Gabriel's arm. "Come on, Gabriel, Amara, we're leaving," she said, pulling them toward the door. As they left, Mom gave me a regretful look over her shoulder before they disappeared. 5 months after the housewarming debacle, a significant opportunity arose at work, a major project in New York that could catapult my career into senior management. However, my main concern was my home, especially my indoor garden. I had painstakingly cultivated a collection of plants, including delicate orchids, temperamental peace lilies, and a recently blooming rare bird of paradise. Each required specific care, and the thought of impairing them in my absence was distressing. After much consideration, I decided to ask for help. I drove to my mom's house. We hadn't spoken much since the party. Surprised to see me, she opened the door. "Bella, is everything okay?" "I need a favor," I began, as we walked into our kitchen. "I'm heading to New York for a few months for work. Could you look after my house, mainly the plants? They need regular watering and care." Her face brightened at the mention of gardening. "Of course. You know I love gardening." Relieved, I handed her the spare keys along with detailed instructions for each plant. The next few months were grueling yet fulfilling. I managed a team across various time zones, working 14-hour days. Despite the intensity of the project, I made time to call Mom weekly to check on my house. "Everything's fine," she would assure me each time. "Your plants are thriving. Don't worry. Just focus on your work." But I overlooked how she was always at my house during our calls. Background noises of daily living subtly audible, yet I was too engrossed in my work to recognize these red flags. After 3 months, the project concluded successfully, and I returned home, exhausted but satisfied with my accomplishment. Arriving after midnight, all I longed for was my bed and a hot shower. But as I tried my key, it wouldn't turn. Confused and tired, I tried again, but to no avail. As I fumbled with the lock, I heard footsteps inside. Someone was in my house. Panic rising, I was about to dial 911 when the door suddenly swung open. There, standing in my doorway as if she owned the place, was Amara, clad in pajamas, her blonde hair in a disheveled bun. Standing on my doorstep, disbelief washed over me. I confronted Amara as she nonchalantly leaned against the door frame of my home. "What are you doing here?" I managed to whisper, the weight of her presence like a physical blow. "What am I doing here?" Amara retorted with a smug grin, her tone mocking. "Living, of course. Been here for weeks now. Daddy helped me move in while you were off playing big-shot businesswoman in New York." My exhaustion from the travel vanished, replaced by a rising tide of anger. "This is my house," I said, my voice strained but firm. "Get out now." Amara flicked her gaze over her freshly manicured nails, her audacity peaking. "Yeah, that's not happening. I'm quite comfortable here. The master bathroom has amazing water pressure, by the way. Get out of my house," I demanded, each word sharp and clear. Instead of complying, Amara actually laughed, a cold, dismissive sound, and slammed the door in my face. I heard the lock click and her footsteps recede. There I was, stranded on my front porch, surrounded by my luggage, trembling with fury. The garden lights I had installed cast a soft glow on the flower beds I had so carefully attended to. Through the window, I could see into my living room, but it didn't look like mine anymore. Amara's belongings were strewn about, her jacket draped over my couch, her shoes scattered across my hardwood floors. Shaking, I pulled out my phone and dialed my mom. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. "Bella, what's wrong? What's wrong?" I nearly shouted into the phone. I just got home to find Amara living in my house. She says she's been here for weeks. Tell her to get out right now or I'm calling the police. No, don't call the police. Mom's voice shifted from sleepy to panicked. We're coming over. Just wait there. Where else am I supposed to go? I snapped, frustration boiling over. I'm locked out of my own house. The next half hour was excruciating. I paced back and forth, my anxiety mounting as I watched the neighborhood slowly awaken, cars passing slowly, their drivers likely curious or concerned about the scene unfolding. Finally, my mom's car pulled up, Gabriel at the wheel. They both rushed out, still in their pajamas, under hastily thrown-on coats. What is going on? I demanded as soon as they approached. Why does Amara have keys to my house? Why are you letting her live here? Mom looked visibly uncomfortable. Bella, honey, Amara needed a place to stay. Her lease was up and she couldn't afford the rent increase. Your house was just sitting empty. Just sitting empty? It's my house. I interjected, my voice rising with each word.
The girl needed somewhere to live, Mom tried to justify, as if that explained everything. Your house is too big for just one person anyway. I cut her off. There is no we when it comes to my house. You were supposed to water my plants, not move your stepdaughter in. I searched my mother's face for any sign of understanding or remorse for the profound breach of trust. Instead, she continued making excuses for the indefensible. Gabriel then stepped forward, his posture aggressive as it had been years ago. Look, there was no point in telling you about Amara moving in. You would have just said no. Of course, I would have said no. It's my house. I exclaimed, the volume of my voice reflecting my outrage. The locks needed changing anyway, Gabriel said dismissively, waving his hand. It's done now. Amara needs a place to stay, and this house is too big for just you. Get her out, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Get her out right now, or I'm calling the police. Gabriel's smirk twisted his features, that familiar condescension etched into his expression as he faced my ultimatum. As a teenager, I faced many challenges, but none as stark as the evening my family's true colors shone through. When my mother pleaded with me not to call the police over my stepfather and stepsister illegally occupying my house, she framed it as a pivotal moment. If you call the police, that's it. I won't speak to you again. Do you want to destroy this family completely? Her words echoed in the cold air filled with tension. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was more of a bitter release than anything humorous. This family? I questioned sharply. You mean the one where your husband illegally takes over my house? That family? Instead of answering, they turned and retreated into my home, leaving me alone on the porch, luggage in hand, as the door clicked shut firmly behind them. My hands steady, I was all firm. I pulled out my phone. There was no more hesitation, no more attempts to preserve a peace that had never really existed. 911, what's your emergency? The operator answered. I need to report an illegal occupancy. Someone's changed the locks on my house and moved in without my permission, I explained. Within 15 minutes, 4 police cars arrived, their lights piercing the quiet neighborhood. The neighbors, now fully awake, peered from behind their curtains as I recounted the events to Officers Martinez and Chin. You're the legal owner? Officer Martinez confirmed. I showed them the property records on my phone. Yes, I have all the documentation. I've been away on business, and I gave my mother a key to water my plants. Instead, they moved my stepsister in and changed all the locks. Officer Chin rang the doorbell. After a pause filled with shuffling sounds from inside, the door opened. There stood my mom, Gabriel, and Amara, their faces a mix of defiance and uncertainty. Good evening, Officer Martinez began. We need to see some identification and proof of residency from everyone. There's been a complaint. Gabriel attempted to smooth talk his way out of the situation. There's been a misunderstanding. Bella gave permission for Amara to stay here. They had a falling out, and now she's trying to cause trouble. That's a lie, I interjected firmly. I never gave permission. They took advantage while I was away on business. Ask them about the locks, they admit they changed them without my knowledge. The old locks were faulty, Gabriel began to explain. So you acknowledged changing the locks without the homeowner's permission? Officer Chin cut in, making notes on his pad. Amara, her earlier confidence fading into fear, looked toward her father. Daddy said it would be okay. He said Bella wouldn't mind once she got used to the idea. Sir, changing locks on someone else's property and occupying their home without permission constitutes a legal entry, Officer Martinez stated, addressing Gabriel directly. We're going to have to take you and your daughter to the station. As the officers led them to the patrol cars, Amara's demeanor shrank. She appeared much younger, more like the 9-year-old girl who had first entered my life years ago. Gabriel's face was flushed with rage, yet he remained silent. My mother stood on the porch, trembling, watching as the car pulled away. When she turned to me, the hatred in her eyes was palpable. From this day forward, she said, her voice quivering, you are no longer my daughter. How could you do this to your own family? I felt an unexpected calm. Mom, I said softly, looking at her steadily. You made it clear a long time ago that they were your real family. The day Amara destroyed my research and you said nothing. The day Gabriel called me names and you excused it. This isn't new. You chose them long ago. The clarity of the moment was stark and undeniable, a long overdue acknowledgement of where we truly stood. Every time they wronged me, you asked me to be the bigger person, to tolerate their mistreatment without complaint. Time and again, you chose them. And when you drove away that night, leaving me alone with the chaos they had brought into my life, it was just another instance of your loyalty to them over your daughter. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the disarray. Amara's designer clothes draped over my chairs, her pictures stuck to my fridge, her toiletries crowding my bathroom. The next morning, I called a locksmith to change every lock in the house, sealing it off from those who had betrayed me. Later that day, the police contacted me to see if I wanted to press charges. After a heavy pause, I declined. Just make sure they know they're not welcome on my property ever again, I requested. I arranged for a cleaning service to gather all of Amara's belongings and delivered them to my mother's house. That weekend, I cleaned my house from top to bottom, scrubbing away every trace of their presence. Sadly, most of my plants had succumbed to neglect. Even my beloved bird of paradise was beyond saving. I disposed of them all and started anew. 5 months have passed since then. Mom tried to call once, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Gabriel sent an email threatening legal action for the so-called emotional distress caused to Amara, which I promptly forwarded to my attorney without a response. Amara, on her part, took to social media to vent about toxic people, playing the victim. But I blocked her account swiftly. Last week, I bumped into Aunt Margot at the grocery store. She mentioned that my mom was having a hard time with our estrangement and suggested I reach out to make peace. Some bridges, I told her firmly, need to stay burned. I've been sleeping better lately. My new plants are thriving, basking in the sunlight that now floods through the clear windows. Dad and Grandma keep in touch regularly from Los Angeles, and I've even planned a trip to visit them next month. Sometimes, out of old habit, I find my hand hovering over the phone, tempted to call Mom. But then I remember that night, standing locked out on my own porch, and the impulse quickly fades.